Hey everyone, Tyler Suiters with the Consumer Technology Association. We are the owners and producers of CES. It is the biggest, it is the most influential tech event on the planet. Today we are talking about resilience. Now, this is a term you hear in the news with some frequency, often about the people who survive and recover from natural disasters, right? Well, not just people, but places can do the same thing through resilience. There is now technology that can support and strengthen the resilience of critical infrastructure and also help the ability for cities, for towns, for municipalities to bounce back operationally after a crisis, or in some cases, even during a crisis. Now, you know that CES supports smart cities, exhibitors, programming, conversation innovation. And those cities are about data-enabled decisions to solve public problems. Think about vehicles like the IoT and 5G, and of course, self-driving cars. Well, resilience is similar, and we're showcasing it very close to smart cities at CES there in Las Vegas. Well, this is technology that will help with disaster preparedness as well as response. Your thumbnail about resilience here, it's innovation that keeps the world healthy, safe, warm, powered, fed, and secure. So today we're talking to one of the world's leading organizations of independent audit, tax, and advisory firms. So that's a pretty good indication of just how important resilience is to corporate America. But first, a conversation with a successful entrepreneur and VC investor who also happens to have a Doctor of Science. And he is well-versed in working with tech projects with Fortune 500 companies. And resilience, he says, very much has their attention right now as well. And Carmichael Roberts is joining us from Boston right now amid his busy schedule. Carmichael, good to talk to you again.
Great to talk to you as well, Tyler.
Yeah, it's been a while. It was at CES, I believe, while watching an NFL playoff game after the show floor closed down.
Exactly. The Seahawks. A bunch of our friends.
And if you can remember if they won or lost, you're better than I am. So resilience. Hard to define in some senses, a bit of you know it when you see it. What's your definition? Because I know it's been used as something of a guide for many who are associated with the resilient sector in technology.
Yeah, I love how you said that. You know when you see it, but it's literally the ability to withstand any kind of natural or man-made circumstance without having your world turned upside down. I mean, it would be the more common sort of a common term definition that I would give to it. And you think about whether it's a hurricane or whether or not it's an earthquake, whether it's just impact from climate change and a drought, or unfortunately in the world that we live in today, whether someone has deliberately decided to attack something, whether it's a cyber attack or worse. In that case, what happens to your everyday life based on your needs? Do they get significantly disrupted, or and if so, how long? Or did they get moderately disrupted, and how quickly do you bounce back? Mm-hmm. And these, the ability to bounce back and the ability to have it be de minimis is in practice resilience.
So we're seeing this conversation unfold in three parts generally, and the common labels seem to be preparedness, responsiveness, and recovery. You cited those. I almost think of them, Carmichael, as past, present, and future when you're dealing with a disaster of some sort. Can you walk us through each of those three stages?
Oh yeah, sure. I like how you shaped that past, present, and future. So if we take a look at let's take a look at the present for a second, because it kind of informs the past. What you want to do is think about what you've learned in history that's happened that is going to repeat itself. You don't know whether it's going to happen to you, but it could. And what you want to do is think about what could allow you to go to sleep at night and not worry so much about it. So the past and the present are really tightly tied together when you think about it. And and the good news is there aren't that many unique ways these days of disasters or disruptants. There are derivatives and slight changes, but history has had enough catastrophes, if you will, that they inform you. So you can therefore think about in the present day what you want to solve for based on what the past has taught us as a being, and then where we're a little bit lost, to be candid with you, is on the recovery side of things, because I would say there aren't a lot of good examples for recovery. I mean, most of the time it's a crisis. Most of the time it's a bit chaotic and reactive. That's what ends up in the news, and that's why it lasts so long. So when you think about those three steps, the first and the second are tied tightly together. The third one, I separate and say that there's a lot of opportunity, so that it doesn't sound dire. I look at it the other direction. I say there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to deal with recovery and tie the second piece, which is dealing with the present when it's happening, into part of that, because that's the first step in recovery, is to be prepared to minimize the damage.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So you're looking at what is essentially an international issue, and whether you call it climate change or global warming, however you term it, that also an international issue, which means it's especially challenging to get consensus, right? Whether to agree on something, much less to act on something. So how do you speak to the international audience, Carmichael? And CES is a great opportunity, right, with policymakers and government leaders from around the world. But what is the common language you're using, the pitch to them, whether they're in an island nation or coastal city that's worried about flooding, or somewhere closer to inland equator where they are worried about prolonged droughts or wildfires, et cetera?
Well, the good news as it relates to this topic of how do you reach out to people on a global basis, is that, one commonality is, I don't care how wealthy a nation you are, or how poor a nation you are. I don't care about, whatever your beliefs or societal, culture, norms and are. Everyone wants their people in their nation to suffer less, not more. And so the first thing that's common, across the globe, is just to appeal to human nature of wanting the best for their own,
Mm-hmm.
And wanting to protect their own. That's a common theme. Now I'm going to go way to the other side for a second and tell you what I really think about when I look at different parts of the world. I think you got to do it on a case by case basis, where depending on the location and the characteristics of that location, you want to be careful not to offer the advice that one solution size fits all, because sometimes there's an opportunity to do something quite different in a particular location versus another location. So the first thing you want to do, to go back to my first point, is appeal to the need, which I think is fairly easy to appeal to. Then the next thing you want to do is not suggest that there's a panacea, a cure that fits all, but sort of force people to look at their situations, what they're more vulnerable to, or not, and where there are common links in different parts of the globe, and get them to start talking about that. And where need be prepared to even customize solutions for your area. Then the last thing I would like to say on this topic that's also important is, sometimes you can look at one country that has a particular issue that's common with another country, will think that the best way to solve that issue is to look at the countries that are the first movers to begin to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's right and sometimes that's wrong. So in other words, let me be more specific off of the philosophical, description. Right. Once upon a time, the United States didn't have a grid. We didn't have a grid. And it was quite, important and brilliant that we created a grid because it actually allowed for a greater amount of stability because it really, you took advantage of scale and norms and began to serve it. If you look at where we are today in terms of technology and innovation as compared to when our grid was originally created for the United States, we're so far beyond that now that the idea that you want to take what we've done in the United States as a grid and say that should be the norm for the globe, that does not make sense. I mean, there's opportunities in other states and nations to take the good of what we've done in the U.S. as it relates to the grid, but also discard the things that we wish we could change. And since they're starting from almost like ground zero and from scratch, build something that actually is quite different that maybe one day we can learn from and adjust our own grid. Mm-hmm. So that's the other part that, the other part of the discussion that you want to reach on when you think about international and global is this whole idea that innovation can come about even when you don't have anything. In fact, a lot of times that's the clean sheet of paper, the whiteboard, the clear canvas is the best thing to paint.
So I'm glad you bring up innovation. You run in some pretty rarefied circles, and I'm going to embarrass you, not by delving into your bio, Carmichael, but let's
okay.
Speaking matter-of-factly, you are in touch with and engage with regularly tech leaders from around the world, well-known names. So we just talked about dealing with political and government leaders and getting the public sector buy-in. But when it comes to innovators and innovation and the private sector driving that, whom are you talking to about resilience? Who is really thinking about it right now, in the world of technology? And where does the enthusiasm lie based on what you're hearing from the people you know so well?
Well, here's where there's hope. A lot of times I get the question from people, are we just too late on certain things? Is it too big of a problem to ever solve? Are we fooling ourselves to even try and address it? And who cares? And who really cares? The amazing thing is, there are, as you mentioned, there are some of the most well-known names in business in the world who care a tremendous amount about it. An example would be I've have the pleasure now of being a member of an organization called Breakthrough Energy, where this is all public information. You can look and see that this organization was originally started by a vision from Bill Gates and his organization, and where he's spearheaded and assembled people like Mr. Gates all around the world who are known for being business leaders. Certainly a lot of people think of their wealth, but getting beyond that, some of these individuals are are what I would call some of the greatest, caring humanitarians on the planet, dispersed, like I said, through continents, not just countries, but continents, and care tremendously about the fate of the planet. And so when you're looking at that list of people and the governments that are represented, there's a lot of hope and a lot of goodwill and effort that's going on, that from very well-known people all around the world.
Mm-hmm. Diving a little bit more specifically into the implications and maybe the better word is applications, Carmichael. We've talked about smart cities for some time now at CES, and that includes ingredient technologies like the IoT, like self-driving vehicles, things that drive greater energy efficiency like smart lighting and what have you. Resilience is connected, and it will be through our CES content exhibitors too, but it's broader, right, in terms of how we approach it, that we're looking at big-scale issues like communications and cybersecurity and energy as well.
Right. And I'm sitting here as you were talking. I was also thinking about the previous question that you asked me. I answered generally speaking about who's involved in paying attention
Mm-hmm.
to the topic. And before I fully answer, maybe I could tie the questions together a little bit. When we talk about resilience, you mentioned these topics now that are really important: cybersecurity, energy, infrastructure, and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. The key thing there is you first and foremost want to try and solve, if you can, for the things in nature that have changed significantly, that create the threat that sits in front of us.
So is that more extreme weather events, for example?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
More extreme weather events, and to the extent that you can prepare yourself and prepare the planet to have less of that, the better off you are.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing so, you also want to create those systems and those products, if you will, that are less likely to get disrupted if an event occurs. So let me be very specific. I talked about the grid.
Mm-hmm.
If you look and think about how could you provide cleaner energy, power, electricity in ways that decrease the impacts on climate change as compared to contribute to them, that's a goal that that the people that I work with, the things that I do, we absolutely have. But if you do that and offer a solution that's fragile and vulnerable, then what is the point? Because you end up putting something in place that, for the moment, when all circumstances are smooth and the threat to those systems are really low and everything is fairly, say, benign in terms of the circumstance, what happens when that changes?
Right, you're not fixing anything. It's a mitigation, right? A temporary mitigation.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So you really want to put something down that's rugged, robust, and AKA resilient. So it's all sort of tied together, right? You want to do both things. You want to come up with solutions that lower the likelihood of the threat altogether, and you want those solutions to feel almost as if they're permanent, right, and have very little vulnerability, whether it's due to something that man has a control over or not. Mm-hmm. And that's what's really key. And the reason I bring that up is when I talk about the leaders of business, and I use the one. But some of these folks are running companies today. Some of the biggest, largest companies in the world. I'll say, I don't know many people that I've met who are running Fortune 200 companies who don't genuinely care about this topic, even beyond the fact that it's just good business. Mm-hmm. I mean, that literally just care about it and are proud of it. You can see it in them. More than that, it's a good message in the newspaper or a good message to Wall Street, but that they really care about it. They genuinely care about it. I can see it in their eyes and their behavior. So they care about both lowering the risk, but also protecting, make sure it's robust and vulnerable, not as vulnerable.
Right. So from a corporate sense, and Carmichael, would you? And this might be a little bit ham-handed on my part, but is resilience the next corporate chapter after sustainability, or is that too linear a way to phrase it? Is it more of an evolution?
It's it may be. It may be neither. Okay, mm-hmm. So if I take your questions very specifically, do we look at this in a serial manner, that you get this done and the next thing you need to work on is resilience? No, it's I would not look at it that way, right? Okay. I would say it's definitely something that you do in parallel, mm-hmm. Is the way I would look at it. And evolution also sort of suggests that it little by little it gets added on. I would say that the very best products, the very best systems are ones that think about solving for X and Y at the same time. Mm-hmm. I want to, the X being, I want to make a big difference in whatever the product is offering at that moment. I wanted to make a big difference to the individual and to mankind, and under my case, if I'm thinking about climate, the planet.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I want to make sure that this is something that's, rugged and can withstand, the kind of things that could knock it off. So you want to do both things. That's the why.
Okay. At the risk of giving you your own direct quote right back at you during our conversation, Carmichael, one of the ways we describe what resilience is and who's exhibiting at CES in this space is technologies that, in the face of adversity, are keeping the world healthy, safe, warm, powered, fed, and secure. To the extent that that echoes closely what you've said before in speaking engagements and presentations, where do those fall in terms of priority, or is it all on an even scale for you, especially post-disaster, right? That future tense we were talking about around resilience.
Well, first of all, you're right. I mean, it made me smile when I heard you say that because I say exactly those lines, and I'm hoping that it does stick. And to hear you say it back, Tyler, means a lot to me. They're all equivalent in my mind. Those are things that are needs. That any one of those things, if they're removed, the level of disruption to everyday life is considerable. In fact, you can't even think. If you're hungry, you can't think. If you're unhealthy, say figuratively, you can't think. If you're cold and you don't have shelter and your family's at risk, you can't really think. So these sorts of like you said, healthy, fed, safe, warm, secure, powered type stuff. I sort of lump into, they're all important because they're required to live.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to say, to be a bit more specific about that list, Carmichael, and I think this falls under healthy, although secure and safe may apply as well. But you have a specific interest in a company called Zero Mass Water. And I don't know if you thought about this as a resilient technology when you first became involved in it, but where does that fit on the scale? Because water is something that is critical to several of those elements, if not all of them.
Right. And that's a great example. Sometimes a product can cut across several needs, and that's when you have a really special opportunity, right? Because you can, and water is just one of those topics that, if clean drinking water is just a topic that is critical for almost all the above, all the topics that we talk about. If you look at, safety and security in the world, is one of the major topics that these days, even most people would say above what used to be oil and gas having the number one, number one slot. We know clean drinking water is critical for health. We know it's critical for nourishment and in eating and so forth, and including growing the right sorts of things that we can eat. So you think about that topic, and it ranks really high. And I did think about it early on when Zero Mass was in its infancy stage. That what Cody Friesen at Zero Mass, the founder and CEO, was doing was touching significantly on all of those topics.
Well, what a great example of the white space innovation that's possible in the resilience sector, right? Because we're talking about an entire suite of technologies but they will, to some extent, ride on backbone innovations that are still to come. So I'm curious if you would, share your perspective, Carmichael, on what the innovations that you see driving the resilience sector are. Is it 5G? Is it blockchain? Digital health may be in there somewhere. And in the case of Zero Mass, it's solar energy, right?
Well, here's the thing that's really amazing. It's typically a confluence of things that already exist. So what do I mean by that? I think about, let's just stick with Zero Mass since we've been talking about that.
Yeah, please.
solar, solar power, solar energy in terms of as a heat source. That's all well known. That's been known for a very, very long time. Things like understanding that there's moisture in the air that can be condensed. Well, today I'm driving my car, and this morning it wasn't raining, but it was kind of humid. I had to deal with the water on my my windshield naturally, right? And then it starts raining, you got to deal with that water. So it's that source of water from the air has always been there. And if you then look at the ability to sort of combine those things, and that's what I mean, the confluence of stuff. That's where I see a lot of the by the way, even sticking, that's where I see the future. But let me even go further. Zero mass water, these units, these source units, there's data that gets generated. And if you've installed, we installed 40, we haven't installed 40 units in Kenya. So when we want to monitor them, they're the headquarters of the organizations in Arizona. So we want to make sure that on a cloudy day or a day that the temperature is 10 degrees lower than average, that we can look at the water output for every last one of those units. So then you go back to data and how through the cloud you can monitor things, but not only that, you can also adjust the settings on those units. So then you start thinking about, well, even though it's a hardware that people kind of see, touch, and feel, that ability to control the data, to even understand to guarantee that the purity of the water is consistent in a unit that's sitting in Mexico or in Ecuador or in Flint, Michigan. And so that confluence that's what's needed, right? When you really think about where the solution sits, sometimes it's not a new invention in the laboratory that has never been done before. Sometimes it's creative engineering around a problem, using things that exist, and that's the innovation. And I see a lot of I see that as being when I look at a lot of the small companies and large company work that's being done today. I see a lot of the applications being more like that. And Tyler, this is really important for me to say, because what I would not want the world to think is the only solutions come from brand new inventions that never existed before. Because then you sort of sit there and say, I'm waiting for that to happen. Whereas sometimes maybe 75% of what you see are just really brilliant combinations of things that already existed, except in combination they never existed. And that's where the solutions sit. So we have more control over our destiny to solve some of these difficult problems than we would ever realize.
Yeah, what a great emphasis on synergy, Carmichael. Final question, and I want to pull back a little bit to that other roughly 25% of things that are new in the resilient sector. So in the short term, if you would prognosticate a bit, you are at CES 2019 and you're at the nexus of smart cities and resilience. What's the one thing you're looking for or expect to see or hope to see in that innovation space around technologies for resilience?
Wow, that's a great question. What is the one thing that I hope to see? And you're right, just to digress a little bit, I also don't want to suggest that there's not room for amazing inventions that come about that are just game changing. That that's another part of the exciting work that I do, is that finding those things, in many cases those things finding me. So to your point about what would I look for? I'm more of a go and look at where the unsolved problems or the poorly addressed needs are, where it almost feels that they're not solved, where you just don't seem to have solutions. And so if I were to think about a couple of those today, I would say that the world has done a really good job in generating clean energy, but sometimes in some cases we can generate stuff but we can't store it. So one of the things I'd like to see in smart cities are really clever, inexpensive, cost-efficient ways of storing energy for long periods of time. If you come back to somewhere between smart cities and resilience, it's a lot of times resilient means being able to store things just like nature does when squirrels put away acorns, or bears, store fat and hibernate, right? I mean, nature's taught us that the ability to be able to store things when we have them in abundance is really important. And that's a major thing that I would love to see on that nexus of smart cities and resilience. I probably would right now put that in my top 3 for sure. And I can think about maybe some other stuff, but that one's pretty heavily on my mind.
All right. He is founder and partner of Material Impact, but that really doesn't begin to do justice of what Carmichael Roberts offers in the tech and innovation sector. And if you're like me, you realize that a conversation with him just leaves you smarter after you wrap up. Carmichael, thank you for sharing your insight and look ahead into the future of where resilience is and where we're going to be.
Thank you so much, Tyler. It's my perfect pleasure and privilege.
Grant Thornton is one of the world's leading organizations of independent audit, tax, and advisory firms. And with us today is Nichole Jordan, who is the National Managing Partner of Markets, Clients, and Industry. Nichole, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for your time.
Pleased to be with you, Tyler. Thank you.
Sure. So one of the things we've been discussing today is resilience can mean different things to different sectors of industry, certainly. In the tech sector, it certainly means one thing to us. But what about the professional services industry and the clients you're dealing with across multiple industries?
Well, we see organizational resilience, the business side and the cultural side of resilience, really in 3 phases. So preparation for disruptions and challenges, and really baking that into a company's culture and strategy. Preparedness is really the key muscle that implements resilience. The second area is in response. So it's key how a company or how an individual responds to the changes, response to obstacles, challenges, stresses, disasters. And number 3, the ability to adapt, grow, and really reinvent or redesign. Maybe it's a company's strategy, it's the operations, it's the business model, or it's a redesign of the value to the customer itself. But essentially, we see resilience as that ability to, as they say, bounce forward even better than you were before, while maintaining your purpose and really coming out ahead.
So let's talk about the implementation there, Nichole. Best practices. What are you seeing right now with executives, board members, management in general, to build organizational resiliency? That's it's part of their strategies, right? It supports the team, but it also is external. It's about customers and really the future of their business.
Absolutely, Tyler. So on the organizational resiliency side for the enterprise, we see management and the board executives playing very key roles in developing this organizational resilience. And in our view, it really begins with that culture of trust as the foundation. Building resilience into the strategy and performance management, being clear on the value and the returns associated with a highly resilient organization. So, Tyler, it's things like higher profits, greater responsiveness to customers' ever-changing needs, greater ability to innovate, greater retention. Resiliency starts with that culture of trust as the foundation, and when trust is high, you can see the benefits. Decisions are made quickly, teams share information, they innovate together, they win together, and they address challenges and opportunities more quickly and more freely. So we focus with our clients on how to build and maintain that trust.
Yeah, some interesting approaches there. What about the back end of all of this, the results? How do you know when you're getting positive results? How do you measure them? How are you working toward achieving these results in resiliency?
Great question, Tyler. We look at, there's always the trusted source of the data, and being very transparent in the way that you're measuring, for example, trust within your culture, your employee feedback, and really pulsing your employees regularly. Being very transparent with the business results and with the outcomes of resilience. But I think other things that we do, we often help organizations achieve the results by, for example, with board members, taking them outside of the boardroom to show them how companies are innovating, maybe proceeding through a Silicon Valley tour, helping them. Another area is really in helping them create a benchmark, like a scorecard or a resiliency index. It's that chance to really do an assessment and compare yourself to the best practice that you've set for your company, that you've set for yourself individually, or even ultimately to compare yourself to your peers. So there are a number of approaches and innovations that can lead to similar success for a company, and we help them figure out the path that is right for them.
So let's address the intersection at CES where best practice and innovation and ideation come together with these practical technology-driven applications, right? What are the technologies that you see really enabling growth in the resiliency sector? Is it around AI? Is it around 5G and connectivity? Maybe it's all of the above, right? What really has your attention where you're seeing progress right now, Nichole?
Absolutely. So one of the exciting areas that we're seeing is the ability to leverage AI and machine learning to drive growth. And Tyler, we couldn't be more excited to join CES this year and see all of the great new innovations out there. One of the things that our customers are really looking for is truly that way to drive a more significant growth system to increase the speed and accuracy relative to value and risk that they're measuring.
Nichole, we've been looking at this from a top-down viewpoint so far. What are your key takeaways? It's so much to digest in a relatively new sector to so many parts of industry. How do you summarize it? What's your exec sum when you're pitching business, or you're giving your elevator summary of exactly what resilience means right now and where we are?
Absolutely. So 3 key takeaways. The first is build organizational resilience into the culture and into your performance management system. It will enable you to almost lead from the middle out. Leaders really being at the intersection of all the constituencies within the organization, driving inclusion, and when an issue hits, they are all communicating. And they know that they are able to take on strategic risks, that change is certainly it's a constant, it's an inevitable, but that it is not to be feared. And you can build that into the culture. Secondly is, again, on preparing for the future. We really believe that the preparedness is the key muscle that implements resilience. So in investing in learning about the future daily, CES is a great way to do that, Tyler. We are looking forward to hosting our clients at CES for that type of learning. Getting an outside-in perspective from external peers and internally, up, down, and with your peers inside your organization. So these are some of the ways that we see kind of in that preparedness area, and we think that is so key. Over time, preparedness provides a higher return on investment than all of the reactive approaches. So we invest big in that ability to prepare. And the third and the final area is just activating your own resilience and building your individual resilience muscle. So
that's going to take some explanation, Nichole.
So that may be individually just thinking about your mindset and the way that you approach things. Are you approaching things differently today? Managing your energy and your stress, mindfulness, self-awareness, so that you can be a better influence, let's say, within your organization, and then, of course, continuous learning yourself individually as well as for your teams. So those are a couple of the areas that just as you build that muscle individually for resilience or for your company as a leader, build resilience into the strategy and into the system and the way that you run the organization, you will drive greater return, greater performance, and a culture that really has a highly engaged employee base. And Tyler, we know that there is no end to the opportunities when you've got a highly engaged workforce.
Nichole Jordan is with Grant Thornton, and this is clearly evidence, since this is very much on your radar, that corporate America and industries across the spectrum are very much paying attention to conversations around technology and resilience right now. Nichole, thanks for the time, and looking forward to catching up with you at CES 2019 in Las Vegas.
Thank you, Tyler. Looking forward to it.
All right, we really want you to join us for our next episode. We're talking about self-driving vehicles. Of course, this will make your drive to work much more efficient, your time in the car much more productive, but this is also getting seniors to and from doctor's appointments and helping people with disabilities get back into the workforce. All kinds of transformative, life-improving applications for SDVs, as we call them. And among our conversations coming up, a journalist who covers the self-driving vehicle sector, and she has talked to folks in Silicon Valley, here in Washington, D.C., about policy, at those technology hubs around the U.S., but also one or two cities you may not think of as a place where self-driving vehicles are very much changing opinions.
I have family in Tampa, and Tampa, Florida is one of the testing grounds for building out kind of smart roads and smart highways to test some of these cars. And they're very excited about it. They think, wow, this is cool.
Okay, so a reminder for you, subscribe to this podcast. It is the best way to make sure you don't miss any of our episodes as we're getting you geared up for CES 2019. Speaking of, all the information you need on CES 2019, that's this coming January 8th through the 11th in Las Vegas. All the info is at ces.tech, that's ces.tech. As always, this entire show revolves around two people, and I am not among them. John Lindsay is our outstanding studio engineer, and Tina Anthony is a producer without parallel in the podcast business, at least according to me. You are both the greatest. Thank you. And we appreciate your time and attention as well. Thanks for joining us. We will see you at our next episode. I'm Tyler Suiters. Let's talk tech again soon.